uh, powerful Black woman, came out of the movement, came out of these communities, these frontline communities that have been used for dumping chemical waste, that are they, where trees have been cut down, where really the front line of the intersection between environment, pollution, economic redlining, criminal justice, and basically become the dumping grounds for capitalism in many ways. And she says something that's so powerful to me, and I want to get your take on it. She's saying, and she's where the Solutions Project is moving is money. If you want to change this system that is driven by money, then the way to do that is to put money, put capital, put resources into the communities that are already on the front lines, that are fighting this. And that's antithetical to philanthropy today. And it's such a radical idea, but I'm telling you, we're only now starting to get that message across. And I want to get your take on it, because I know you have a really interesting understanding of this.
Well, honestly, you just hit all the points. Like, you are completely right. And you know this, right? Distribution of supporting folks that are on the ground, supporting folks that have been doing this for a long time is instrumental. And it's really interesting. I'll bring this in. Oftentimes people ask me, they're like, what can I do to support? And I think it gets really overwhelming when we think of just from a data point of view. When you look at the data and you look at the way it's impacting us now and the projected levels to harm us in our communities, especially in the face of inaction. Well, hopefully that's going to change about now in the policy realm. I always think of the fact of it's overwhelming, because oftentimes people think of what can I do, not necessarily what can I do in collaboration with the work that is already being done. Because the truth of the matter is people have been working on for decades. And you know this, you yourself are someone who's been in the space for a long time. And there are people that have been doing this before, we were born. So there are people that have been part of social movement, this work for so long. And as long as we understand that we're all a part of the same ecosystem and support those folks on the ground through distributing our funds, or, supporting in other ways that folks are asking for, then we can really intentionally support the work that's being done and really expand the scope of the work that people are doing.
Totally. Now, I want to get into, so some of this work has brought, I think there's a class dimension to this that we can't like not take into account. Because I've been to parts of Pennsylvania that are poor, working class, rural, white areas. And they're being treated the same way that poor Black areas, or almost all Black areas, are being treated. And I think sometimes we miss the partnership that when we talk about this, it could sound like we're only talking about a certain kind of people, when the fact of the matter is it's touching all of our lives. And so how do we work together? And what is the message to our white brothers and sisters who just happen to be white? What is the message that we want to say? Because, we are centering on justice, and yes, people of color are definitely, more likely to be on the front line of these problems, but there's also a lot of white people who are also there. So how do we talk about that in an inclusive way that actually reflects the reality that you and I both know exists?
Yes. And it's interesting, because I think it all goes back when we think about the definition of environmental justice. It's full and meaningful of all people, regardless of class, gender, and the ways that are affect all people in environmental decision making and the creation of problems. And you're right, absolutely a huge difference in the way that people experience the environment. So it's really important that we use that lens, uplift that lens of, yes, all people and all people, intersectional lens, understanding that we all experience the environment based off of our positionality, right? And using that lens to create communication that reaches. And I never actually mentioned in this chat where I grew up. So I grew up in the quiet corner of Connecticut, rural Connecticut, and I grew up in a predominantly white community. I first in Putnam, Connecticut, which is listed as one of the distressed communities in Connecticut, experiencing injustice. In fact, there's a scheduled pipeline building in a town right next to where I grew up, which is predominantly white as well. And in those instances, I often hear people feel as they are left out of the climate conversation, are left out of what a just transition looks like. What I say to those people is a just transition requires the creation and utilization of language for a future that is livable for all of us.
That's
you could
right.
be white, you could be black, you can be indigenous, but it is a just future that's livable for all of us. We don't have the time to leave people behind.
And by taking care of the people on the front lines, by lifting up their stories, their experiences, their adaptations that they're already making in the midst of these issues to make their lives work in the midst of climate change, in the midst of environmental degradation. We are actually lifting all people by lifting the people who have been the least accounted for, the least taken care of, and the most dispossessed of all of us. And that does, by nature, happen to be by, Black, indigenous, people of color, poor white people. And that's what we're really talking about. When we talk about justice, that is essentially, justice is for all. And I think, it gets perverted right now by the other side, but somehow you're going to lose something by giving some justice to somebody else, What do you
Like productive.
Yeah, talk about that. I saw you, you have something to say.
Yeah, I think, and I think about this often, and the immediate thing, right, to be frustrated is well, why can't we all have a livable future? However, I understand, right, when people immediately want to protect their loved ones and feel as though that attention that's not for them might mean that less resources, less support is going to be wrapped them and their community. What I'd say to that is there's room for all of us plus some, because in order to make sure that we're all supported, in order to make sure that your own home, the people that you love, are supported sustainably, that means everyone has to be. So supporting other people should be, that frame should be, because that inadvertently impacts yourself, your communities, love. And honestly, right, justice is about all of us. So not doing so doesn't abide by that framework.
Not at all. And it's it's really, for me, it's always been about justice. That's what moves me, and I don't know what it is. But when I see people that have been either marginalized or dispossessed or oppressed find their voice and find justice, it makes me feel better as a human being. It makes me feel more at home in the world that I'm living in, and it makes me trust that the systems that we have in place are actually for us all, and not just for the privileged few. And that's like, I feel like I think that's in the voice, that's in the throats and the minds and the hearts of the people right now. I feel like what we're really talking about, this movement, is just about justice and equality and fairness. And what could be better than that?
I have a quick question for you, if that's. I just thought of it while you're speaking. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay. you've gotten this question a lot. So whenever I do a speaking engagement, the last question, wow, where do you get your hope from? And I always stumble on this because I almost think that it should be framed of where do you get your courage from? And so I'd like to pose that question to you. Where do you get your courage to speak up, to use your platforms, to talk about things that may be, seen as radical, or things that you may not necessarily have a place to speak about, but you really disrupt that idea. And I think it's really inspiring. So I'd love to know where you get your courage from.
I guess, you know, it's kind of this age-old thing about, I mean, strangely, it has a religious dimension to it. It has, you know, who are we answerable to? What, what is meaningful in life? What is, how will we look back on our legacy and who we are and how we were thought about, you know? And did we do good in this life? Like, did we live up to our own principles? There was a moment, like early on for me in the fracking fight, where I was invited to Dimmick, Pennsylvania. It was about 45 minutes from where I lived. And I walked into a room full of maybe 20 people who were living in the midst of this mass industrialization of their community that was leaving their water poisoned. And half of them had illnesses. They were sitting there with folders with all of the letters they'd sent to the Department of Environmental Protection, to the EPA, to the local district attorney, to the state district attorney, to the representatives. All of those were unheard. They were all ill. They were terrified. And I walked in and they looked at me and they said, "Will you help us?" And the need in that room was terrifying to me. I was also just starting to come up as an actor, and I didn't want to make waves. I didn't want to hurt my chances by going up against an industry that could maybe destroy me. You know? And so I kind of ran out of that room, and I went home then. And I couldn't sleep, and you know, I got up and I went and looked in the mirror, and it was like, "Hey, Ruffalo, are you who you say you are? Do you really care about people? Do you really care about your community?" And I couldn't. I went back and I called up and I said, "Hey, what can I do?" And 2 weeks later, I was on Rachel Maddow's show breaking this story about hydrofracking and what it did in people's lives. And that gave me a lot, you know. And I guess at the end of the day, the courage comes from what have all the greats ever done, but acted on behalf of their fellow man, putting themselves in harm's way because of it. And I'm not even close to that. You know, I'm not even close to what Martin Luther King Jr. was doing. I'm not even close to what Bobby Lewis was doing. I'm not even close to what Christ was trying to do. I'm not even close to what, you know, the great martyrs were trying to do, which was this very thing. And the beauty of the moment that we're living in now, that you and I are talking like this to each other directly, not through some monolithic centralized system, is that we can distribute that responsibility so that you don't have to be a martyr and I don't have to be a martyr, but that we share the weight of all of the movement together, and all of the people that we're talking to collectively and individually are also picking up that mantle.
Wow.
right?
I'm processing, and one, thank you for answering a question that I just randomly asked you, but there's so much that you said, so much that we all can and thank you for being so candid and authentic in your answer. I really appreciate it.
Oh, buddy, you're right there. Now, I want to hear from you. What gives you that?
While you were answering, the first thing I thought of is, oh no, he's probably gonna turn it around on me. Where do I get my courage from? I I should have also said this before, that saying where you get your courage from is harder than saying where you get your hope from, and maybe you can also
Yeah.
agree on that. Where I get my courage from, I almost don't see it as courage. I see it as an necessity.
Yeah.
I hadn't said this earlier, but I grew up obviously caring about the environment. I think of like the principles of what environmental work is, of caring about clean environment, access to clean air, healthy, culturally conscious food, access to green space if you so choose to use it. All of those were things that I cared about, but I never made the connection between those things, valid environmental experiences, or want. So I started doing environmental work because when I did have my moment, when I was in high school and I began to get of environmental justice and what it could use environmental work as a way to disrupt systems of oppression and really support the most vulnerable. I was really frustrated because I had never heard of these concepts before in my life. I had never heard of environmental justice. For me, environmentalism, honestly, was this top thing that only people care. And I kind of just, put it in the back saddle of like that I cared about, but didn't have time to focus on. And so I feel as though I get my inertia to do work by really changing that narrative. I think there's so much untapped possibilities, get more people involved in this fight for a just climate future, just by letting them know that the experiences that they have, problems that they have, are valid in the environmental space. And the ways that we want to live and we want a just future are in line with the climate future. And what worries me a lot of the time, which goes back to ask about my classrooms, what worries me is sometimes I wonder if the environment has a capacity to be able to just climate future if all of us are involved at the decision, people creating the solution. And so for me, necessity, because I want to do whatever I can in my lifetime to make sure that we're at the table and that all people are really represented. We don't have to basically experience any type of subjugation as we move towards the future.
100%, man. And that's why yes, that's beautiful. And it's very moving. And I think you're absolutely right. And that's really, I think, what's at the essence of this work, because in the past, even in the recent past, the solution was always geared toward a certain class of people, and mostly white people. It was geared towards making money, and expediency. How do we get there as quickly as possible, and how do we sell this to the big corporations? I want to get into this too a little bit. And so when we talk about moving forward with equity, the way we do that, I think, is that we're focusing on frontline communities, and they like in Buffalo, push Buffalo, like the things they're doing in Buffalo right now. They're completely renovating. They're renovating their soil, they're renovating their cultural life, and they're renovating their economic system, all based around climate change. They're the first people who actually had a solar system on top of public housing that has also community space, and now they're refurbishing all of those brownfields that were destroyed by industry and growing their own food. And that is the answer. That is the equitable answer. And because of that, crime has dropped there. Because of that, there's greater community buy-in. There's greater community engagement in the political scene. And they created that out of their own desperation and need. They would have done that on a fucking death sorry. They would have done that without any help from anybody, right? They're fighting for their lives, right? And so when you give them some money, when you give them some resources, the solutions blossom out of these, right? I want to ask you about the idea. So we're seeing a move towards holding corporations responsible. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that movement a little bit and where we haven't even begun to scratch the surface yet. We're seeing the power of it coming out of the Trump administration, and we're seeing how much we can affect through this lens. But I want to get your take on it. What does the BDS movement look like for climate change?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because while you were talking, I was like, oh my goodness, I always think it's important, right, to hit people with that data point of the fact that it was 100 companies that have contributed to 71% of greenhouse gas emissions. If that doesn't tell you about who we need to hold accountable, I don't know what else will.
That's right.
And on top of that, that's been the legacy of governments subsidizing fossil fuel industries and knowing what climate change was. I mean, we know that the fossil fuel industry knew what they were doing in the 70s, and they basically were still moving forward with what they were doing. So when we think about addressing or think about how we want to contribute to, we have to hold people. We think about individual collective action. I'd love to hear what you think about. There's been a lot of conversation of which is more individual action, and there are different arguments regarding that. But in my personal idea, right, there's no such thing as collective action, individual action, and individual action doesn't work with collective action. And when we think back to the data point of 100 companies, I mean, that should blow your mind. It's absolutely wild. Think of that. That means that we have to rally together, hold folks accountable. You know, Sunrise Movement is doing incredible, right, and really building up upon. I mean, all their practices aren't new. They quite in cultivating movement basically read from the textbook of the civil rights movement and really utilize practices and really allow the movement to live on, and ensuring we're holding our public accountable. We're holding these industries. We let them know, not letting them get away with it, because it's literally a matter of life and death.
Yeah, and when you see the system that we're living in, they've gamed the system. They have their lobbyists. They create the laws that make it easier for themselves. They make sure that economically they're getting the tax breaks and tax cuts that actually are great for their bottom line. And they have us down here in the dust, groveling or fighting against one another, or trying to change the way we recycle or the pipes we're using, when they're on the take at the top the whole time. And they play on these divisions. They're playing on racism. They're playing on economic divisions. They're playing on the ideas of scarcity to keep us from looking at them.
Yep.
They're the ones. We don't have any control over our politics. We don't have any control over our politicians. We see, maybe 1/10 of what we want people ever makes the law. Who gets the law? Who gets all those corporations? And I think that's really important. That's the moment we're at now, is to say, no, we see you, and we're not standing by it anymore. It's over. The game is over.
Exactly. I saw someone said period. period to all of that.
Here.
Right.
And so, when I see, like you said, sunrise, I mean, I'm only I'm only bringing this up because it's happening. I see it in what you're doing. I see it in what Sunrise is. I see it in what the youth movement is putting together. I'm seeing the connections that are being made, and it occurred to me, we should have some sort of discussion about this today because, something said to have this discussion, you know.
Sorry, you cut out right there.
I just thought it was an important discussion to be having, and one that we're almost there, but we're not quite there as a movement,
Yeah, but the momentum is continuing to build. There are so many. Another thing on something that genuinely does give me hope, right? Is discipline. It's something that you have to lead to by doing the work and doing action, whatever capacity you're able to do. And that has been really, really in the past year is obviously the pandemic has been. I don't have the words to explain the way that I feel right now, but what I've seen in the past year, the way that people have really come together, collective action.
Yeah.
People have really facilitated community. Really, when we the first in our lives aren't necessarily able to people that we love in the way that we have our entire lives. The way that people have come together, the way that people are pushing for intersectional environmentalism, the way that people have now, pushed their in-person organizing and activism into new formats and cultivated new audience. It's really eye-opening, and it's really inspiring, and it's something I think about at night when I'm also scared. Yeah. So I think it's a good next step, and it's a good feeling. It's a good part of.
I totally. It's something has shifted that is. I heard someone say that love is not what brings us together. It's hardship. And one thing about this pandemic that's leveled us all is how we've all been affected by it and how it has shown us how deeply connected we are in our humanity, our care for our family, our care for the people we love. What really is the value to us are those connections, how much we miss those interactions. And I think that shifted something in our priorities as just human beings as well. Listen, we should probably wrap up. Although I'm surprised by how many people have stayed with us. It's probably the most. And hi, everybody. Let's say hello to them. Hey, everybody. Thank you.
I can see all my friends now that I look down. They're so supportive.
Awesome. I want to talk about Black, your organization, Black Girl Environmentalists. I mean, let's leave on that. Like, what are you doing? What? How do we join? Like, who is it for? Let's jam on that a little bit.
I just saw some of our members go, "Hi, Mark." So, Black Environmentalists, I would say, is a community and a project of love. I often think of environmental work as being the ultimate form of self-love, of having the audacity to fight for something that the people we love, but also ourselves. It's okay to say that. It's taken me a long time to be able to say that.
Yeah.
Black Girl Environmentalist essentially is a supportive community for and by Black girls, Black women, and Black non-binary environmentalists. So many of us have been kind of traversing within the climate space, not really seeing similar life experiences, and oftentimes feeling really, really alone. Yeah. And sometimes it can be isolating. And so we decided to create a community that to get each other from not just the US, but around the world, and builds community. Because community really is everything. And really is promotes and thrives on radical love, and it's a great additive to my life, and I think everyone involved. And right now, obviously, we're doing our first big official launch in January, so we're super new, but I've been doing stuff for a couple months now. And we do everything